Hello?
One sec.
Wait, I can hear you now.
Yeah, but you can hear yourself, right?
No, not really.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
Well, howdy.
So were you just debating a race realist and like, because I don't want this to be a redundant conversation.
I doubt this one will be like that one. Yes, I was just debating a race realist.
Okay, well, I wanted to talk to you about Jews as a racial group, as well as just race in general. It seems like you don't think Jews are a distinct racial group, which is interesting.
Well, there are Jewish ethnic groups, like, the... Oh, God, you know the names. Yeah, there are Jewish ethnic groups.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that all Jews belong to a Jewish race. Also, race, I think, might not be the best term there. Ethnicity is probably a much better descriptor, because race tends to refer to, like, a broad, socially identifiable set of characteristics, whereas Jewish ethnic groups can be attributed back to a pretty specific and narrow range of origins, you know?
Well, so I guess we can start with like race in general. I mean, if since you were just talking about that, we don't have to spend too much time on it. But so you're of the belief that like race is a social construct and it's only skin deep, right?
Yeah, that race as we understand it is mostly social, and that it doesn't really tell us that much about a person, or really even that much about a group. That most of the differences between racial groups are highly phenotypical. They're just, superficial, skin deep.
I think that's so interesting because I hear people on the left make fun of like Bible thumping conservatives for being, science deniers and whatnot. But when somebody brings up the idea that, there are groups of people that evolved in distinct environments, and as a result, their physiological and cognitive differences were written off as, racist or
Well, you would
stuff
have to
like.
prove the existence of those differences and then prove that they were a product of inherent genetic differences. So nothing about what I'm describing is anti-science. I'm actually describing the scientifically accepted position at the moment. Like, you know that, right? You know that, like, biologists aren't all a bunch of race realists. I'm the one who's standing with the experts on this. The reason for that is because while skin-deep characteristics, like, say, for example, skin color, nose width, that kind of thing, those are easily changed by environmental differences. How close you are to the equators, the amount of dust storms, so on. Humidity. While that may be the case, intelligence is an extremely complicated characteristic that is determined by many hundreds of genes, none of which are directly susceptible to environmental influences. It's not like the sun heats up the brain and that makes it act differently. All humans the world around form the same social groups, and that seems to be most of what makes us us.
Well, that sounds nice on its face that, differences between racial groups are arbitrary, but as much as we try to avoid race, it's like pretty much unavoidable. Like, for example, with COVID-19, African Americans right now, more specifically in the northern areas of the country, are being disproportionately affected to a more significant degree
Why
by
do you think
COVID.
that is?
Inability to produce vitamin D effectively in colder weather, and that's proof positive right there. And
Wait,
and that's
proof
go
positive
ahead.
of what?
That race isn't only skin deep. There's physiological implications that translates to stuff like the healthcare system because we have to treat patients differently on that genetic basis.
Yeah, we're not saying that there aren't differences between racial groups. The essential claim made by race realists is that there's an inherent intelligence difference. That's what I reject. Of course, you have the sickle cell anemia thing with, like, West Africans. There are physiological differences. When I say skin deep, I'm sorry, I wasn't encompassing all difference, but broadly, I mean, like, it's not an intelligence difference. These aren't, like, severe or significant differences. We're not different types of humans. We're not different species or anything. They're
But
just...
what if I were to tell you that, um, let's say we threw intelligence out the window? What if someone were to tell you that blacks and whites and Asians and whatever, they learn in different ways and they grasp concepts differently, and it's therefore different capabilities and different cognitive areas may vary from group to group. What if somebody were to tell you that? So what if it's not just inherent intelligence, but just the expression of intelligence?
Well, it would have to be demonstrated that that's an inherent biological difference.
Well, I mean, it is stuff like spatial reasoning, verbal intelligence. I mean, that does vary from.
It varies, but those things correlate to education as well. Do you know that those are inherent?
Well, I mean, I guess you could improve that biologically, but there are biological markers that affect things like behavior. I mean, it's proven. There's been genes that have been isolated and identified that have a palpable effect on how different groups behave.
Yeah, we're not arguing that genes don't affect human behavior. What I'm arguing is that there is no evidence that there's some inherent difference in the intelligence capabilities of people of different races, like broadly as a group. We know that there are differences, but we don't know that there are inherent differences. And a lot of these things are influenced by culture. For example, we know for a fact that speech testing for certain indigenous groups has led to them underperforming because those cultures don't have the same languages that we do. And thus the way they structure sentences and form ideas differs from the ways that we do. So when we test them based on our standards, sometimes they underperform. But when adjustments were made to account for cultural differences, those variances would sometimes fade away or reduce significantly. So how much of it is inherent? How much of it is, conditioned?
Well, there's definitely an inherent quality to it because when a lot of these ideas, let's say you try to take the cultural factor out of it and you try to pull them more into the abstract, studies have shown that the differences are even more exaggerated.
Between what and what?
So I think, okay, so there was one of the main arguments against the IQ test, as it was becoming more popular, was that it's very culturally biased, and that explained the difference between, blacks and whites. And what they did was they took a lot of those ideas and they pulled them more into the abstract. Mm-hmm. And then upon doing that, the differences were exaggerated. Like the gap was even more seismic.
I can't speak to whatever specific set of results you're referring to, but I don't know what this has to do with the central question as to whether or not these are inherent differences or not.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not trying to. So, what the point is that distinct groups of people that have distinct histories have different. I don't know. I guess they have like a different spirit, almost like the way they engage with society.
Now who's being anti-scientific?
Well, I'm not being anti-scientific. I mean, when I say spirit, I just couldn't find the right word. But what I'm saying is that the way that they engage with society, the way that they learn, the way that they behave, I mean, this stuff varies, and it's
people culturally vary, but we're talking about inherent biological differences.
Okay, well, you keep trying to pin down on the inherent biological differences.
Isn't that what we're talking about?
Like I just explained, genes have been isolated.
Wait, genes have been isolated. Wait, hold on. Genes have been isolated for intelligence between different racial groups?
No, but for behavioral trends. And then you said, oh, well, that's just behavior and it has to do with culture. But behavior pretty much is like your cognition inflecting, like your cognition, like expressing itself through, I guess, like societal engagement.
So no, we're playing mush with a lot of different concepts here. So if you're referring, I think you're referring maybe to like a genetic subdivision within East Asians or something like that. There are some genetic markers that differ based on racial groups that have influences in behavior, but from the studies that I've read, not only are these influences unbelievably minor, in some cases when tested you actually find contrary results. What we're talking about are scientists finding incredibly minute impacts on human behavior based on loose scatterings of genetic distributions that don't even map perfectly to our conventional understanding of race. This is a long way away from proving inherent racial intelligence divisions. It's a huge, huge, huge gap away. This is something that got brought up by that Canadian Nazi, or at least he sent research about it to me, and then somebody else sent counter research. It seems like every time proof is found that there are any differences between any humans, all the race realists throw their arms up and they're like, yep, that's it, we were right. But no, the proof is yet to be found that there are any inherent intelligence differences between races. Certainly anything that would affect like actual real life behavior, as opposed to some minor fringe difference.
Well, if I'm being completely honest, I didn't like the intelligence wasn't the main factor for me. I just thought that we can identify these differences and it can inform how we look at society and how we organize society, because I think it can work for the betterment of society if we actually deal with pragmatic reality and these differences.
What's the reality?
Because you yourself said, well, the reality is that there are different people with different distinct histories that engage with society differently.
All people are
And
like that. Every individual is genetically different and has had a different upbringing.
I agree with that, but there can be trends that can be identified on a group level,
What
is
trends?
what I'm. Well, like I just said, I mean, the differences between, IQ scores and different groups, and
Those
also
aren't inherent.
how they view themselves, and also how they engage with people of other racial groups. Like, I think that, like a lot of surface level things that, a lot of people like dig into, and they kind of brush over and say, oh, well, it needs deeper analysis. Like the fact that you can gather where a person's ancestors came from simply by looking at them, I think that in and of itself is significant. It's a qualitative observation
Not with
that,
regards to understanding intelligence differences between racial groups. It's utterly irrelevant with regards to that. You're making another argument from intuition. Because you can see differences in people. That means you know how, whether or not, like, as a group they behave differently
well, you
inherently.
don't know
There's some
everything
genetic.
about them. But what I'm saying is that you can derive from these qualitative observations that, you know, there will be differences among groups just based on that alone. I mean, you can just look out your window and see that people are different and that the differences are remarkable
But yeah,
in
but this doesn't argue any social prescription. You could say that about any group of people. You could say that about tall or short people, long-haired or short-haired people, whether they have piercings or tattoos. It doesn't have to be genetic, racial, epigenetic. All you have to do is indicate that different people are different. We know that. This is the Mott and Bailey that always frustrates me. It's like you want to prove that different races are more intelligent than other races. But instead it's like,
well,
oh man, well, different groups of people are different, you know? Like, yeah, we know, but there's been a ton of research on genetics and the influence that genes have on intelligence, and the evidence is just not there in spite of centuries of research. It doesn't seem like different racial groups have, different levels of inherent intelligence.
well, how do you feel about different racial groups having a particular set of goals and interests? How do you feel about that? Do you think that's a thing?
I mean, maybe motivated by cultural and social influences, sure. Genetically, don't
Yeah,
know
I
if
mean,
there's an argument for that.
I'm not saying it's derived like from their genetics. That's why they have particular interests. But do you think it's informed by their history and how their relationship with society throughout history? Do you
Sure, but
think
then we're
that's
then we're talking sociology, which is what I majored in. So yeah, but that's not a race realism issue. Black people are going to have a different set of goals in America because black people were fucking slaves for a couple hundred years, and they're still treated poorly today. So of course they're going to have a different set of priorities, concerns, such and such. You know? Yeah.
so? I mean, what about Jewish people? Do you not think that they have interests, and do you not think that that's also tied to their history as a nomadic people? Do you think that's
Wait, hold on. So there was a half of that I agreed with, and then a half that I didn't. So history as a nomadic people, there are plenty of Jewish people who have never in their life lived as or known anyone who lived nomadically. I can tell you that much.
no, well, their
Now, do
values will
Jewish people
survive.
are their priorities influenced by the history of their people and what they've experienced? Yeah, of course.
Well, no, a lot of Jewish values were specifically derived from their history as nomadic people that still stands today in things like the Talmud and
There
things
are
like is I
lots
mean,
of lots of different types of Jews with lots of different
well, there
priorities.
was a study. There was a study that came out where like 80%, and I couldn't for the life of me find it, and I know you're probably gonna hold it against me, but there was a study that came out where like I think 80% of Jews, regardless of whether or not they were religious, so this includes non-religious Jews, said that they saw themselves as Jewish. Okay.
Okay.
And like 50% of them said that they felt that their identity was like tied to social justice. I couldn't find the study, but
There
I
a
think it was
problem with
around
that?
like,
So it's a study where Jewish people
well,
said they're Jewish and they like social justice. I mean,
well,
yeah. So
and well, this includes non-religious Jews, which goes to my point that
so they're
if you don't
culturally
see
Jewish.
Jews as a racial group, then why would Jews themselves see them that way?
Culture. You can be culturally Jewish. But you can be culturally Jewish without having any blood in common with the 12 tribes of Israel or whatever. I know that. I grew up among a ton of Jewish people. There are a lot of people
So
who
did
were,
I.
yeah, there are a lot of people who are Jewish because their mom was Jewish, their dad wasn't. They married, that kind of thing. A lot of variants like that, But they'll still
Well,
consider
okay.
themselves Jewish, Light a menorah candle, that shit sticks with you. Eat some tasty Jewish food, whoo, that shit sticks with
But
you.
but here's the thing: if they're non-religious, right? And you just said that they don't share any blood with any of the 12. That doesn't make any sense because why would they see themselves Jewish if they're non-religious Jews? That doesn't make any sense.
Culturally, what? Wait, I see myself as American, but not
Yeah.
because of my nationality. Even if I renounced my American citizenship and lived abroad or something, I'd still see myself as American. Because culturally, I was raised American. They were raised Jewish, even if they're non-religious. What if they renounce their religion when they turn like 19 or something? They still spent 19 years of their life, practicing Judaism. And now maybe they're not religiously Jewish, but culturally they still feel influenced by that. I mean, I would consider myself culturally Christian. I have never believed in God, but I'd still say culturally, yeah. I mean, I have a Christmas tree that I put up. We do the presents, we do the stockings. That's influenced by my upbringing.
So where do you think this cultural Jewishness came from? Just out of thin air? They just
What?
decided one somebody in their ancestry just decided, you know what? I like the whole Judaism thing. Let's just be culturally Jewish from here on out. You think that's how that happened?
No, it depends on how you're raised. I imagine it would be the same way that you are culturally Christian, you
No,
know?
what I'm saying is if somebody comes from a family that is culturally Jewish,
Mhm.
where did that cultural, I guess, Jewishness come from?
Probably
It
from
didn't
their
just
parents.
it's because they are descendants of Jews. I mean,
From their
it's just
parents, yeah, but it's not a blood thing.
I mean, it is yes, it is.
Okay, wait. So I need to make sure we're on the same page with this one. So you can be raised by parents in a culturally Jewish manner, even if not a single person in your family is in any way, shape, or form related to the 12 tribes of Israel. You
Do
could,
you not
that's,
see the logical inconsistency there? I mean,
no,
where
I'm
what I'm
actually
saying is,
struggling to
where did it
understand how
come
you
from?
don't
Where
get
did that
this.
cultural Jewishness come from? That's what I'm trying to identify. Where
Because,
where
so,
along the, like
wait, it's really
go
easy.
ahead.
Okay, I can tell you like a really easy example, okay? What if, here, I'll give you an easy example. This happened to one of my downstairs neighbors when I was growing up. Okay,
Okay.
what if you have a kid who was born to two, I guess you would say just white people, but non-Jewish white people. They were born to two non-Jewish white people. Then later, the mom and dad divorce, and the stepmom is Jewish. The stepmom raises the kids as Jewish themselves, and then those kids go on to be practicing Jews for the rest of their life, having children who are then culturally raised Jewish. Now there's no blood tie whatsoever to any of the 12 tribes of Israel, but there are people being raised culturally Jewish. What about cultural Christianity? I mean, my father was a Catholic, but I don't have any cultural Catholicism in my. We don't have any like Mother Marys or crucifixes scattered about the house. We had a Christmas tree.
Okay.
Blood doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just what you're raised with.
Okay, well, the example you just gave, somebody who is racially Jewish stepped into the picture, which is the stepmother. And I'm sure your argument is going to be, oh, but what if the stepmother wasn't racially Jewish?
No, but the
But
kids aren't racially Jewish then. So are wait, all you have to do to be racially Jewish is to have at one point known or been raised by a Jewish person? Is it just like transitive? You can just be
no,
a race by inhaling their carbon dioxide?
no, you really just muddied the water with that analogy because what I was trying to say is that the culture of Jewishness came from people who were racially Jewish, who viewed themselves as such, and created, I guess,
Yeah.
a set of values
Yeah,
from that.
4,000 years ago, the origins of that group is like as old as the pyramids of Egypt. So nowadays, there are tons of people who are culturally Jewish who might not at all be related to those early ethnic groups. There are people who are, but there are people who aren't. I grew up in Beverly Hills. There are tons of people there who are culturally Jewish. A lot of the people, by the way, in Beverly Hills, most of the Jews there are Iranian. They call themselves Persians, not Iranians, because they want to distance themselves from the current Muslim regime. They came over here after the trouble in the 70s. They came over here. Many of them are not in any way, shape, or form directly related to the original 12 tribes or whatever. They're just Jewish. They're just Jewish. Like, why do you have to make it sinister? Why play up this racial
I'm not
angle?
making it sinister. I like to identify, like, because you made this exact argument. I think you were criticizing. I don't know. I think Rising or something, where you can identify problems, but you don't have to share solutions in common with, like, insidious, fascists or whatever. Why can't we just deal with the fact that Jews are a group of people that have their own set of interests? And I'll give you
All
I'll give you some
all
anecdotal
groups of
stuff.
people are influenced by their own interests. A
Go
Jewish
ahead.
man could be influenced by being Jewish. They could be influenced by being white. They could be influenced by being brown. They could be influenced by being a man, by being straight or being gay. This is intersectionality. Everybody is influenced to some extent or another by any number of characteristics they were raised to or born with. That's not
Okay,
sure
so
that's
you're
the case
making
with
the
Jews.
exception that a Jewish person can have a set of interests based on that
I
Jewishness.
didn't disagree with that. I said that at the beginning of this convo.
Okay, so how do you feel about the fact that a lot of the Jews that I've spoken to growing up, regardless of their religion, um, had dual citizenship to Israel, did not view American as their quote unquote home, and that they told me themselves that Jewish nepotism is a thing,
I
and that
is that a serious question? Like I'm supposed to answer the Jews of your past? Like tell me
well, it's
why I
not
had
just
this
the Jews.
convo in eighth
It's not
grade.
just the
I
Jews
don't
of
know
my
what.
past. It's not just the Jews of my past, because Jewish. Do you think? Okay, how do you feel about Jewish nepotism? Because I know you believe in like white nepotism historically. So how do you feel about Jewish
I
nepotism? Do
think
you think
that
that's
all
real?
groups engage in a degree of in-group bias.
Okay, and how far-reaching do you think Jewish nepotism is? Do you think it's a problem? Do you see any trends that maybe kind of throw you off a little bit, or not really?
Not really. It just seems to be a fact of a tribalistic world that we're trying to fix with time. It's less of a problem now than it was 100 years ago. 100 years ago, everyone in power in this country was a non-Jewish white at all times because of explicit government policy. Now there's more diversity in our positions of power than there ever has been in all of human history, which I think is pretty awesome.
So how do you feel about the two most recent disasters of this country being, let me just say,
Like, reel it in a little bit because I can tell you're about to go crazy town. Just
well, no. I'm saying, okay. So, how do you feel about the fact that subprime mortgage crisis and the Iraq War had heavy Jewish involvement, and that nobody's willing to actually identify that?
can you quantify heavy Jewish involvement and also try not to sound like a conspiracy theorist by saying nobody else wants to recognize this?
What is APAC? What is APAC? What is that?
Wait,
And
hold
why
on.
were
I
they?
know what APAC is. So there were tons of groups gunning for our participation in the Iraq War. I don't know why you're like hyper fixating on APAC. APAC is going to want us to go there because Israel wants us, America, to be as militarily involved in the Middle East as possible because that ensures their borders or allows
And
them to
how is
grow their borders.
and how is that able to happen?
Because we have a massive military industrial complex that's headed mostly by Republicans who are totally okay with killing brown people.
Okay, well, I guess you can say Republicans, but do you not feel that there were people in positions of power that maybe weren't totally being loyal to the U.S. and maybe they had some dual allegiance going, or if not, just complete
So wait, I
treasonous?
notice how we backed off like the earlier point here. First of all, I still want to get to that 2008 financial crisis. Second of all, no.
Yeah, let's talk
For
about.
if you're a war hawk, being pro-Israel is not being anti-America. The opposite is true. Israel is America's greatest military base, and the Middle East is an incredibly contentious hotspot for geopolitical relations. The more we militarily service Israel, the more we support them, the more money we pour into wars that also benefit Israel, the more likely we are to maintain geopolitical control in that region. It's the shared interest of Americans and Israelis that we be locked in a permanent war. The only real solution to this problem is, of course, a radical one, a one leftists would advocate for, which is to detach American geopolitical power from a military involvement in the Middle East. But, like, the narrative that you're trying to suggest right now, that APAC Jews are controlling the strings behind the
That's
scenes,
not what I said.
that's what you implied. It's
I'm saying
ridiculous.
support was cultivated because there were people in positions of power that weren't completely loyal to the U.S.
No?
That's what I.
Do you have any evidence of that? Because I just
Yeah,
answered that point of
what
yours, and
happened.
now you're just repeating it.
No, because I'm saying, okay, so why do you think that? Why do you think that um, APAC was able to influence our government the way it was? And I know you said, oh, because
I already
um,
addressed this.
Yeah, you said Republican Warhawks, benefit
Well,
from.
to be fair, Democratic Warhawks as well. AIPAC exists to facilitate positive relationships with Israel because Israel wants to maintain a positive relationship with America, and America also wants to maintain a positive relationship with Israel, assuming we're talking mostly about Zionists and Warhawks, which unfortunately we're mostly talking about because most American politicians are going to be, at the very least, Warhawks, and the most ardent Zionists on the planet are fundamentalist Christians, who are, by the way, more responsible for the relationship we have with Israel than AIPAC could ever dream of being. So,
Well, I agree with that.
yeah,
I do
so
agree with
I don't think this has anything to do with like Jewish people. Also, most Jews are quite progressive. They're not the ones gunning for perpetual military intervention in the Middle East, you know?
But I'm saying, do you not think that there can be an underlying motivation?
I need arguments, not like conspiracy bait. Like, don't you think it's possible? Anything's possible. Give me an argument.
Well, the argument I'm trying to lay out is that disproportionately Jews are in power in government.
So are
And
white
I
people.
feel like
So are the Irish,
reason
by the
why
way.
we were able to cultivate support. I feel like
That's the conspiracy right there. The idea that it was like Jews in government who cultivated support for the Iraq war because they were disloyal, that's ridiculous. There's absolutely no evidence for that.
Conspiracy, but I'm saying that there could have been underlying motivations at work that might have informed some of
Could have been, might have been. Conspiracy bait
that were made. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So again, like, there's nothing substantive here to even respond to. Like, what am I supposed to say?
It's called drawing a logical line from A to B.
It's called just asking questions. I don't have an argument, but like, let's play around a little bit. And not to mention, you're playing pretty fast and loose with the accusations you have no proof for. Evidence of people being disloyal to the U.S., you're not going to be able to provide any, but you're comfortable saying it anyway. If I call you out in it, you'll move to the next point. But I know how these conversations go.
Well, no, because here's the thing: if you're willing to dump trillions into a foreign war that helps a completely foreign country, then
it helps. Wait, no, I just said it helps us too.
Well, you said it helps us, but you didn't say like it directly helps us. You say it helps the powers that be. That's how you frame that.
That's the us. Yeah, that's bourgeois democracy for you, of course. The powers that be are the us.
Are in positions of power. I mean, it's.
No, you can't. Wait, hold on. We've already moved off so many points. You're like, the Iraq war was them being disloyal to the U.S. Well, actually, by disloyal to the U.S., I mean they were only serving their own interests, and by that I mean they were Jewish. Like, what do we mean? Everyone in the U.S. was gunning for the Iraq war. Were you around back then? Don't you remember? Everyone was gunning for it. The military-industrial complex wanted that sweet, sweet contractor cash. Bush wanted to finish his father's work in the Middle East. We wanted an opportunity to defend Israel because they'd cement their power base as like a fucking long-term military base that we could use for future conflicts. Iran's relationship with America was continuing to be like a rocky disaster, and we wanted to flex in the region. Like, there are so many factors that play into this. The whole "it was Jews and they were disloyal" thing just doesn't buy it.
Well, I mean, that's you're trying to like you're trying to come up with like this straw man where I'm just like, oh, it was Jews and they're all, it was like a smoke filled back room, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that sometimes, how you self-identify, and a lot of the people in power were Jewish, while it may not be overt, like, but a lot of these people do have dual citizenship. You can just look it up. A lot of these people in positions of power do have dual citizenship.
Is that surprising? Israel will find Jews in America and give them birthright citizenship to Israel. That's a state policy of theirs.
Well, yeah, exactly. So maybe, they can, a lot of the people in positions of power, they can run a profit-sharing war and then come out on the other end. If, America goes to shit, then they have a second home, while a lot of people don't.
Wait, Israel goes to shit if America goes to shit. So no, it's in Israel's best interest to make sure America stays steady as well.
Well, if they keep siphoning money off the U.S., they can build their own infrastructure to defend themselves again.
Wait, no. Israel does not exist without continued American intervention. Not for long, at least. Or somebody in the UN. Not that there's any ally they can find greater than our own. But again, do you understand how ridiculous this conspiracism you're engaging in is? So in spite of the fact that everyone was gunning for the Iraq war, you're like, well, these people, because of their dual citizenships, were okay using the Iraq war to dump trillions into Israel and bail on the country because then they could go live in Israel. As if wealthy and powerful people needed a citizenship to Israel to bail on this country if things go tits up. This is ridiculous conjecture. I mean, come on. If
I
you want
wouldn't
to
say it's
focus on
conjecture.
if you want to focus on a good non-falsifiable argument, you should just stick to there are a lot of Jews in power and maybe they have an in-group bias, which I'd agree with, but I'd say that the same thing of any other group, you know?
Well, what I'm saying is that the Jewish nepotism has been more harmful than definitely like black or Hispanic nepotism.
Can you
I would
prove
say
that?
it's equal to white privilege. I guess you could say Jewish privilege is just as bad.
How would you prove that? Also, most Jews are white, so they're gonna if that's what they're benefiting from, they're kind of double dipping there, aren't they?
I would agree. I would agree that Jews do like to identify as white when it's
Many
convenient
Jews
for them.
are white. Again, because you think
mean,
Jewish is a racial group. So if a person says, I'm Jewish and I'm white, to you that reads as hypocrisy. But it's not. To them, it's like saying, I'm Christian and I'm white, or I'm Irish and I'm white. It's two completely separate identifiers. There's no conflict in their mind.
About that, like I just said, there was a study that came out where like 80% of Jews, including non-religious Jews who are not religious, said that they saw themselves as Jewish
And
what
not white,
what does that tell you?
as opposed to white? Was the study Jewish versus white?
Well, because you just equated.
Wait, them seeing themselves as Jewish doesn't mean they don't see themselves as white.
Do you see the flaw in the logic there? I just said that 80% of Jews, including not non-religious ones, and you just equated Jewishness to religiosity.
So wait, why can't they be Jewish and then identify as Jewish but also be white? If you asked me what I identify as, I would say I'm an American, not that I'm white, but I'm still white.
Okay, but America is a nationality.
And culturally, it's also a culture. If I revoked my American nationality, I would still consider myself that.
Okay, but there's a difference because you can literally trace the Jewish genealogy back to a given set of people.
For some, but not for all.
Not for all, but the people who identify as such more than likely have Jewish blood in them, and also you can tell by someone's countenance. Like if someone says that, like, oh, hey, I'm a Jew, and you can see by their countenance, oh yeah, that person's a Jew. I'm not out here trying to identify Jews, but I'm saying, like, to say that they're not a distinct racial group is just ridiculous.
Wait, again, I said they're an ethnic group. I can see a white person and point out if they're Irish too. By the way, have you never seen like a ginger with like pale skin and freckles? They're white. They're Irish. Like
people. I mean, that's what are they, Gaelic or whatever? Yeah, I mean,
yeah. So wait, but this isn't contradictory. You can be white as well. There's no contradiction here.
There is a contradiction because if you look at the haplogroups, I mean, there's...
Wait, again, you can be white and also have identifiable haplogroups, okay? It's not like every Jewish person is like 100% Ashkenazi, okay? The vast majority of them aren't. There are some pockets where they are, okay? I've seen Jewish people who were almost certainly 100% Ashkenazi, okay? And some of them still look white. They come from a region of the world adjacent to the Iranian people. The term Aryan originally referred to Indo-Aryan, Iranian people. Our understanding of white historically has bled into the historical origins of that part of the world too. We all came from Africa, after all. So this is way more complicated than you're making it out to be. The idea that a person is hypocritical for saying they're Jewish and they're white is just ridiculous.
Okay, I mean, well, I'm not even of the belief that if Jewish people aren't white, but I'm saying that they're not like
bullshit, dude. When I said most Jews are white, you said, yeah, most Jews identify as white. Come on. And earlier you said you weren't trying to suggest that Jews were pulling the strings behind the scenes. You're absolutely making these insinuations.
Well, no, because you made it seem like I thought it was like a huge conspiracy when I said no, that they can just like their Jewish identity could inflect upon how they view policy, how they view society.
Everyone's identity influences that. You would need to prove that it's having a detriment to society or that there's some major problem here.
Yeah, it did have a detriment to society. It's called the Iraq War and the subprime war.
You've already lost the Iraq War argument because everyone was gunning for it, and you have no evidence to indicate that Jewish in-group bias was what led to that war. Absolutely none.
But I'm drawing the logical, like I said.
It's not logical. It's not. We're not seeing the train of thought.
I mean, why don't you want to deal with the facts? I mean, the fact is that I mean, the people in power disproportionately. I mean, can you not just put 1 + 1 together and just deal with that, and we
So
don't have to draw some
I can't. I'm
insidious
sorry. I can't lower myself to the degree of your shrimp brain. I've already provided the counters to your arguments. We can move on to the subprime loan mortgage crisis if you want, but I doubt that one will
Yeah.
go any better. I'm sorry, my dude. The problems that are going on in your life are not going to be fixed by blaming Jewish people. I just don't know why you're so obsessive over that.
I'm not blaming. I'm just saying, why can't we identify? Why can't we
That's
diagnose?
that's blaming. That's a coward's blaming. You're a coward. I'm not blaming them. I'm just asking why we can't all wake up to the fact that they're at fault. Like, come on, dude. At least have
I'm not
the
saying
balls to
they're
own the
completely
positions
at
you hold.
fault, but I'm saying that I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire.
This is
when
again. This is a non-argument. This is like
It's not.
I don't have arguments, but like it's logical. It makes sense in my head.
So, do you not think that disproportionately that Jewish business practices have tanked the economy on more than one occasion?
What are Jewish business practices?
You know, money lending and just the chicanery that goes on.
Hold on. Money lending? You mean the basis of the entire modern financial system? Are we blaming Jews for that?
No, but things like the Federal Reserve and and corporate loans and stuff like that. I mean, it's just complete.
No, these are pretty much just how modern economies have to work. You'll notice that even countries that are anti-Semitic on the whole also practice these things. They do it in Iran. They don't like Jews over there. So this isn't really a Jewish practice. This is just how modern.
Tanked their economy like over and over and over again.
We're not talking about whether it tanked their economy. You ascribe these practices to Jewish people. It's not. Every economy does this. This is just how capitalist economies work.
But I mean, historically, the architect of a lot of these business practices that aren't pro-worker, I'm suppose you're like super proletarian or whatever.
Not defending these concepts. You're the one who's saying they're essentially Jewish. If you're going to go back to the medieval argument, you should probably read up a little bit more on that. Jews were pushed into those positions because Christians weren't allowed to engage in usury. Right. So you can't blame Jewish people for an economic practice that A, existed before them, B, existed after them, C, existed in countries that have them or do not have them, and D, that they were only associated with because of systemic discrimination. Like, that's ridiculous. You can't blame them for that. This is how economies work. Yeah, loans have to happen, business loans, subprime mortgage loans. It's a problem with capitalism.
But why does Goldman Sachs get bailed out? And
this has no. I need a question that has to do with Jewish people because I don't feel like explaining 2008 to you.
Well, I mean, I know what happened in 2008, but what I'm saying is that, like,
do you think it was because they were Jewish? Like, Goldman Sachs was like, "Hey, Goyim, we need money," and then they all met in like a smoky room with cigars, and they got what are you insinuating here?
But what I'm saying is that the distinct history of the Jewish people informs how they practice business or whatever.
So again, everyone practices business that way. You can go to Azerbaijan and they practice business that way. You can go to India and they practice business that way. Unless you think Jews are so powerful that they literally invented the concept of banking and then made it default and ubiquitous across every country on Earth. If you are making that claim, then Jews are powerful enough that we should probably just let them win already. I would like to believe the more reasonable argument, which is instead that that's just a way economies work, and that Jewish people got pinned for this shit because Christians were too much of pussies to have the blood of usury on their hands back in the day. But they still knew it had to happen.
The wealth was consolidated, over a long period of time as a consequence of what you just described, in Jewish hands. That's why when you go back to a lot of the wars and how some people won wars because a Jew would just finance one side of the war, and that's how.
No evidence of that. I like you're deferring now to like complete hearsay. Like, oh yeah, dude, like those times in history where like Jews would just make white people fight against each other like puppet masters.
World War II and how.
World War II was a world war, right? Wait, I'm sorry. Are you going to blame Jewish people for financing the Allies in World War II? I wonder why they would have done that. It really makes me.
No. But that's what I'm saying, though. I'm saying
really activates my onions. Why would Jewish people want Nazi Germany to lose?
Because they were being systematically executed. I completely agree.
So again, the problem is you keep saying Jewish people when what you actually mean is the system that exists, and you're hoping everybody listening will just assume that like every system that exists is controlled by Jews. I need specific names and dates and evidence that was done with some kind of Semitic bias, which you're not going to be able to provide because that's what a conspiracy theory is. It's a narrative so grand and overwhelming that it can't be disproven. Anytime I nail you on 78 points, you'll go to a 79th one about how there was some guy. Like, it's nothing. It's all hearsay.
I mean, you can look it up. I mean, the information is there.
What info?
The information on these financiers and how the inception of the Federal Reserve, you can look all this stuff up.
The Federal Reserve was created like 150 years ago. Are you telling me that America 150 years ago was like super pro-Jewish person? We didn't even allow any of the Jewish refugees from Germany to come in before World War II. Why? So did Jews invent that? How? Oh my God! Did the Jews, were they the one who built the pyramids? Was it? How far back does it go?
No, we all know Africans did that, right?
I don't know. I mean, did Jews build fucking Machu Picchu? How in Argentina? Where are we? Where are we going? Like is everything
I don't see
from
what
them?
The problem is in just trying to point out trends and trying to figure out what's really at work when we're talking about identifying problems. I don't understand what the issue is with that.
I'm sure you don't. I mean, again, if you have any specific dates or people or times you want to talk about, that's great, but you don't. This is scapegoating.
Well, I don't want to pull up the document now, but I mean, if
I document, you have a JQ document.
That's one Jewish person. I mean, can you name another one? And I'm not really trying to go through. I'm just trying to say what's the problem in identifying these trends and having an honest conversation.
Because you have insufficient evidence to prove your claim of a global power grab by Jewish people. You're trying to make a very large claim.
I started this off by just saying I feel like it's not a terrible thing to identify that Jewish people have their own set of interests because they are distinct.
Every group. That's every group, though.
Okay, so you're conceding it then.
No, that was the first thing I said in this discussion. That's every group. Every group has distinct interests based on the material conditions of their.
For example, blacks probably have their own set of interests, but I mean, who gives a shit? It doesn't affect anybody.
It does affect people. Actually, right now, between BLM, the presidential guidance of Joe Biden, the civil rights movement, and the fact that
historically, right now, it's but throughout the course of history, I mean, let's be honest.
What are we being honest about? That black people were oppressed and didn't have much political power? Is this something we have to dog whistle?
What I'm saying, yeah, it hasn't been as harmful. They usually they've had the shitty end of the stick. That's my point.
Okay, so right,
and then there are people who have disproportionate power who also have interests that have been disproportionately harmful to society. That's my point.
Right, but you can't prove that invading Iraq was a Jewish interest. In fact, given the fact that the majority of Jewish people are Democrats in America, I'd be willing to bet that they have less support for the Iraq War than the general population.
Well, again, I'm going to go anecdotal here, but the Jews I knew growing up, even though they were Democrat and progressive, a lot of them, some of them were for, the Palestinians, but a lot of them were not. And they were progressive.
What does that have to do with the Iraq War? Also, wait, I'm not engaging with the anecdote. Never mind. Yeah, I don't know. What changes do you want to make to the world as it is? What's wrong with the world as it is? I have a couple problems with it, but none of them have to do with Jewish people.
Well, I think that America is definitely a failed social experiment.
We're the most powerful country on earth.
It is, but socially, it's just in a horrible place. I think we could both agree on that.
No, we have less social unrest than a great many other countries. There are other countries that experience significantly more.
Compare us to third world countries, I mean, sure.
China, India, both have more social unrest than we do, and they're the next world powers that are coming on the up and up.
Yeah, they're coming up. You can say they're technically first world, but their populations are much bigger. There's a lot more people in poverty in those places. So, I mean, the social unrest is going to be higher in a place like that. But I'm talking about fully developed. I'm talking about Europe and America.
European countries also have quite a bit of social unrest. I don't know if have you seen what's going on in France right now? America really isn't that bad off when it comes to social unrest.
Well, okay. Well, during the George Floyd protest or whatever, to me, that's clear evidence that something. I mean,
something right's happening.
Something, I guess. I mean, and from your point of view, but obviously, we have two distinct people that obviously do not like each other, and nobody's really getting what they want.
Wait, black people like white people just fine. People are getting more and more amicable towards race relations. This isn't about two different groups of people. It was a protest against the police.
It was, but there was a racial undertone to it. Do you not agree with that?
Well, yeah, because it's mostly black people that get fucked over by the police. Black people aren't anti-white. BLM is not anti-white. There are tons of white people at those BLM protests. My parents were there. They're pasty as fuck. Not as pasty as me. They go outside.
These institutions that they have such a problem with are of, European origin. And I think they're actually correct.
No, policing is, hold on. Policing is not of European origin. As I understand it, like proto-policing or the institutions that would lead to it are basically as old as human civilization. Modern day police existed in America. I think they originated with the slave patrols, but iterants of those things existed in many different societies beforehand. The idea that black people being pissed off with the police system means they're pissed off with European culture is ridiculous. That'd be
they extrapolated from that though. Like they were making broader points about society as a whole. I saw like their whole, argument laid out. I think there was some sort of, document they released where they listed like all their problems. I mean, it seems like they're, again, I'm going to say it again, there's two sides, neither one's really getting what they want, and a lot of white America is also, fed up. And I think
hold on, again, we're saying bullshit again. That's not true. Again, having problems with the institution of policing does not mean black people want to like leave America. And white people getting fed up also doesn't seem to be the case. Younger generations are more progressive than ever. White Americans, while still disproportionately conservative, are trending favorably with all these issues. And for a time, Black Lives Matter was supported by 68% of the total population. Now I think it's down to about 60 because George Floyd was the height of the protest. But yeah, the idea that this is some like burgeoning race war is absolute bullshit. That is just not the case. I don't think
it's a burgeoning race war. That's not what I was. You're engaging in hyperbole. That's not what I said. What I'm saying is that, well, first of all, I just said that they were making broader points about society as a whole. They weren't just stopping at police. That was my first point.
Yeah, there are problems with society.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I'm saying. Like it didn't just stop at police. Like they have a problem with American society as a whole, which I can't even blame them for, if I'm being honest, because the country wasn't necessarily built for them, and that's how they feel, and I can't fault them for that.
Well, so they just want to fix the whole racism thing, I think.
Huh?
They want to fix the whole racism thing, I think. I think that's the big thrust there,
Well, that's the thing, it sounds nice on its face, let's get rid of racism, but it seems as if the development of society has been like a corollary with the development of racism or racial tension or whatever. It seems like as the civilization, came to be, so did racism.
That is not even remotely the case.
It is the case. It is. If you look at, the early days of society, and as, Europe and all that, and all those places.
What do you mean early days? What are we talking about?
I guess I'm talking about like post Rome. I guess like industrialization and all that jazz. It seems like that's when a lot of race science started to become public.
But society has gotten less racist on average for the past 400 years with time. Just because a modern conceptualization of race was formed about 400 years ago doesn't mean that people have been getting more racist. We've been getting less racist with time. We are now in the least racist part of all of American history.
I feel like you're talking about post-civil rights movement, and if that's what you're alluding to, then that's mostly due to conditioning. I feel like if the civil rights movement never happened, I'm almost
from the advent of the abolitionist movement to the abolition of slavery to sharecropping to Jim Crow to modern civil rights movement and the many decades that have followed, people have been getting less racist. This has been borne out in every conceivable sociological way imaginable.
The abolitionist movement was because people didn't want the slave population here. You do know that, right?
The abolitionist movement was formed of many different groups with many different interests, but the majority of those interests were largely humanitarian.
They wanted them to leave.
The majority were humanitarian. What you're referring to was the proposition that Lincoln briefly held, that slaves should be freed and then sent to to a foreign country.
Abolitionists had a huge problem with such a large slave population being in the country and thought it would be better for both sides, more specifically white America.
Some of them did. I don't know how this is relevant to the discussion we're having, though.
Well, I'm just saying, well, because you said, how do I want society to be better? And I feel like,
Society's only been
um,
getting better the less racist we get. The real problems are from people like you, who, with no understanding of the issues, persist in your racism because you're scared or ignorant or whatever.
well, you do understand that when blacks were were less integrated in, I guess, white society, they had, they had a lot better outcomes actually.
In some respects,
A
they
lot
didn't
less,
have the
a
drug
lot
war to
more
deal with
than
back then.
what?
They didn't have the drug war to deal with back then. Most of the problems that we've seen in the past 40 years with the inner city black community has largely had to do with their relationship to drugs, the drug war cartels, and the fact that they have been increasingly targeted by the police. Prior to
Yeah,
that
I think
point, they were second class citizens, but they were also left relatively autonomous within their own neighborhoods, especially when it came
exactly
to.
they were doing much better. If you look at all the metrics, by every metric, they were doing better.
That is
By every
incorrect. In terms of
Yes,
general
no, it's not.
education, academic attainment, income, and representation within the upper echelons of society, black people are doing better today than they were then. There are modern problems that we could largely fix by ending the drug war, which is one of the things that Black Lives Matter people tend to push for.
Yeah, well, like I just said, the juggler was stupid. But pre integration, the crime rate in the well, because of the drug war, like you just identified. But
Yeah.
yeah, the crime rate was lower. A lot less of them were in poverty. They weren't in the upper echelon of society, but a lot of them had good jobs and
No, a lot
good
of them did not have good
personal
jobs. That is not
responsibility. Well,
true.
good jobs as in jobs that provided for their family and kept a roof over their head. And the conflict was actually, I mean, I know you're going to say, oh, well, they couldn't drink at the same water fountain or whatever, but
So wait,
racial.
hold on. What you're doing right now is you're trying to imagine a history in which blacks being second-class citizens led to them leading better
No,
lives in America. This
no,
is not the
that's not,
case.
I didn't say as a result of them being
And
second
then
class
what are
citizens,
we talking about?
because I'm talking about the fact that they were able to, kind of have some self determination, and they,
As
lived.
second-class citizens, how do they have self-determination more so than they do
Well, we
today?
could have just made them not second class citizens without having to forcefully integrate them. How do you feel about
How did
that?
we forcefully what are you talking about? How did we forcibly integrate them?
Well, going to the same schools and
Oh, so
shit
not
like that.
forcibly integrate. You mean you wanted to keep them second-class citizens. I'm
No,
sorry,
that's
how
not.
exactly do you make them first-class citizens while continuing to disallow them from participating in American society?
Well, they could participate in American society, just not alongside whites.
Yeah, that's what a second-class citizen means. So you wanted to maintain the second-class citizenship status.
No, I just think like there was MLK and there was Malcolm X or whatever. MLK viewed white America and it's like its institutions as like an apparatus to help lift blacks out of their situation, while Malcolm X took more of like a self determination approach. I feel like that approach would have had more longevity, and it's bearing out because
In
blacks are doing a
MLK's
lot.
in MLK's sorry, not MLK. In Malcolm X's last days, he disavowed
I
his black
know, and he's
separationist.
wrong. He's wrong,
So
and he was.
so wait, so again, so you don't actually have any like arguments for any of these positions. You're just sort of citing people and places, and whether you're wrong or right, it's just a general feeling you have, you
Well,
know?
I'm giving you the empirical reality.
The
Like
empirical
blacks
reality is that America is,
before
for better or for
segregation,
worse,
crime rates were much lower.
right
I mean,
now, the problems you're describing aren't because black people exist in America, it's because of the drug war. This is what you people always do, and it's why I have no respect for you. You fuck over black people and then blame them for not picking themselves up fast enough. So the drug war. The drug war has led to an incalculable removal of autonomy and wealth from the black community. It's led to an
I've already,
ungodly amount of crime. You'll point
I've
at that
already,
and you'll say, hold on, you'll point at that and you'll say, hey, the drug war is bad. I don't defend the drug war. But then you'll use the consequences of the drug war as evidence that blacks should not be allowed in America. That's the problem with people like you. You're willing to trip black people, or at least watch them be tripped, and then blame them for being on the ground. It's ridiculous. Black people today are in a better position than they were back then. There are unique problems they face today. It's not good, but we can fix
by
it.
what metric?
By what I already explained those metrics earlier. Whether we're talking educational attainment, whether we're talking general income, whether we're talking representation in like upper society or in business, those elements. And many of the problems they face are microcosms of problems that workers of other races feel as well.
And that's another thing. You put a lot of value, like, oh, educational attainment. Like, what's wrong with most blacks having like a menial job that
Is this? Are you a troll?
I'm not a troll.
I'm not
Why would
entirely
I be
sure.
wrong?
You can probably answer that question for yourself without me having to waste time and breath
Well,
answering it for
because you
you.
can see that the academic outcomes of blacks when they started entering these elite institutions were a lot worse than other racial groups, and I feel like that's
Wait, by what
because
metric?
you can just this is common knowledge.
Yeah, poor
They
people tend to
failed
do
disproportionately
worse in higher education than wealthy people. Is this meant to be
well,
surprising?
I'm not saying that they shouldn't be allowed. I'm saying it should be merit based. And what I was saying is that even though blacks back then didn't have like a degree from UPenn or fucking
So we're
Dartmouth
jumping
or
around to
whatever,
quite a few points again. I noticed you just said some really dumb shit and then you backed off of it.
I'm
So
not.
you said that black people do worse in higher education?
Yes, they do. Just
Right,
look it
of
up.
course.
Ivy League,
Because,
look it up.
poor people
Look it up.
do worse in higher education, obviously. Black people are more likely to be poor. All of this is really easy to chart out. If you're alluding to some sort of perceived intellectual inferiority on the part of black people, I'd
That's
defer
not what
you.
I'm saying.
Okay, then your point had no meaning. Like much of what you say, you'll imply a point, but then when I ask you to clarify it, you didn't actually mean that point. You were just sort of talking, you know?
Well, back then, blacks had their own institutions, their own schools
They're
to
worse schools, much
learn and
worse.
teach amongst themselves, and they had better outcomes back then.
No, they
And
did
even
not.
though
You
not all
keep
of them were,
saying
like,
that, but they didn't. I
super
don't know why you.
brilliant, oh, they got a degree from some awesome institution that I'm sure you fucking think is amazing. A lot of them were still providing for their families, staying out of trouble.
Okay,
And
again, we're going over old points. We know that the drug war has led to a lot of problems in the black community, and you have no evidence whatsoever to indicate that these people were doing
well,
better
also,
academically
you knew that
before integration.
there was a study that came out where proximity, like poor people's proximity to wealthy people, also had a huge effect on crime. So, like the people of different class statuses being closer together
That
would
makes
lead
sense.
to more crime on behalf of those who have less. So that was also that's not just the drug war. There's other factors at play. You keep just oh, it's the drug war, it's the drug
That's
war,
a
it's the drug war.
pretty huge part. So again,
I
the
agree,
problem is
but
this
proximity between those two disparate classes of people were also a big factor, Vaush. And that's how it's not just the drug war.
Wait, do you think that wealthy white people and poor black people were closer to each other back before blacks were integrated?
Do I think they were close to each other?
Closer together than they are now. At this point, I'm not entirely sure what argument you're even trying to make. It feels like every time you want to make an argument, you kind of gesture at it, but then when evidence doesn't pan out to be in your favor, you move away from it, you know?
Well, I'm saying like when blacks started going to cities, right? When they started, moving to cities more, and that's not just a result of, desegregation, but I'm just saying that when they started moving to cities, I guess of their own volition, like the closer proximity to those people of a higher class status, that also leads to crime. There was a study on this.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear that at all. I
living
finally beat
close-
Orth from the cause.
Oh yeah, you're shit at Bloodborne, by the way.
Yeah, that's
But,
okay. It's at least I'm okay at making arguments for social prescriptions that I have.
well, no, but what I was saying is that there's data that poor people living close to people who aren't poor also leads to more crime.
Yeah, that probably makes sense because people who aren't poor probably have access to more resources that people who are poor want. And inequality is what causes crime, not just poverty. Income inequality is what causes crime. If you just have a bunch of poor people in like a county, that doesn't produce as much crime as if there's a big divide between wealth and a lack of wealth in a county. So that makes sense to me. All right, hold on. I have to play some Bloodborne. Do you have a final meme that you want to share?
No, that's pretty much it.
All right, I love you. Don't freak out about Jewish people, okay?
Yeah, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. You're really good at what you do. So good
Thanks.
job.
I love you. Stay strong.